As I entered the Aurora Planetarium, the cool air and dim lighting washed over me, a stark contrast to the sweltering summer heat outside. I'd always found solace among the stars, their distant twinkle a reminder of how vast and mysterious our universe truly is. It was my escape, a place where Dr. Ellie Thompson, environmental scientist, could shed her professional skin and just be, well, me. I made my way to the main exhibition hall, my blonde hair catching the soft glow of the celestial displays. My green eyes darted from one exhibit to another, drinking in the latest astronomical discoveries. That's when it happened, a collision that would change the course of my life. "Oh, I'm so sorry," a melodious voice exclaimed as I felt a gentle bump against my shoulder. I turned to find myself face to face with a woman who could have easily been mistaken for a celestial being herself. Her brunette hair cascaded in soft waves around her face, framing warm brown eyes that seemed to hold galaxies of their own. "No harm done," I replied, offering a smile. I was too busy staring at the stars to watch where I was going. She laughed, a sound that sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. "Guilty as charged. I'm Vanessa, by the way, Vanessa Clark." "Ellie Thompson," I responded, extending my hand. As our palms met, I felt a jolt of something. Static electricity, perhaps? Or maybe just my imagination running wild. "So, Ellie," Vanessa said, her eyes twinkling with curiosity, "what brings you to the planetarium on this scorching day?" I gestured to the star map behind us. "Just escaping the heat and indulging my secret passion for all things cosmic. You?" "Same here," she grinned. "Though in my case, it's less of a secret and more of an obsession. I'm working on a project that combines my love for stars with my day job." Intrigued, I raised an eyebrow. "Oh. And what might that be?" "I'm an urban vertical garden designer," Vanessa explained, her excitement palpable. "I'm creating a rooftop garden that mimics constellations using different plants. It's a bit out there, but hoping it'll encourage more people to look up and appreciate the night sky." I couldn't help but be impressed. "That sounds incredible. As an environmental scientist, I can definitely appreciate the blend of nature and astronomy." Vanessa's eyes lit up. "An environmental scientist? Now that's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about your work." Before I knew it, we were deep in conversation, moving from exhibit to exhibit as we chatted about our respective fields, our shared love of the cosmos, and our hopes for a more sustainable future. Time seemed to slip away, much like light bending around a black hole. As we reached the planetarium's centerpiece, a massive dome showcasing a real-time map of the night sky, Vanessa suddenly reached out and grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered excitedly, pointing upward, "a shooting star." I followed her gaze, watching as a brilliant streak of light cut across the artificial sky. In that moment, with Vanessa's hand on my arm and the faux stars twinkling above us, I felt a strange sense of rightness, as if the universe itself was aligning. "Did you make a wish?" Vanessa asked, her voice soft and close. I turned to look at her, suddenly aware of how near she was. I did," I murmured, though in truth I couldn't have said what I'd wished for. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end. As we reluctantly made our way towards the exit, exchanging numbers with promises to meet again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just occurred. Like the birth of a new star, unseen but undeniably present, a spark had ignited between us. And as I stepped back into the harsh sunlight of Aurora, I found myself already looking forward to our next encounter under the stars. In the weeks following our chance encounter, Vanessa and I fell into a comfortable rhythm of meeting at the planetarium. Each visit felt like unwrapping a gift, revealing new layers of our shared passions and individual quirks. The way her eyes lit up when discussing her latest garden designs, or how she'd unconsciously tuck a strand of hair behind her ear while pondering a particularly intriguing celestial phenomenon. These little details began to occupy my thoughts even when we were apart. One balmy evening, as we lounged on the cool grass outside the planetarium, waiting for the stars to emerge, Vanessa turned to me with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know, Ellie, "I've been thinking about our first meeting," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. "Do you believe in cosmic coincidences?" I chuckled, picking at a blade of grass. "As a scientist, I should probably say no," I replied, watching her reaction carefully, "but I have to admit, there was something special about that day." Vanessa's smile widened, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said softly, "because I've got a proposition for you." She proceeded to explain her latest project, a community garden that would incorporate sustainable practices and serve as an educational space for local schools. "I could use an environmental scientist's perspective," she concluded, her eyes meeting mine. "What do you say? Want to save the world with me, one plant at a time?" I didn't hesitate. "Count me in," I grinned, ignoring the little voice in my head that whispered I'd have agreed to just about anything she suggested. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into the project. Long days were spent poring over plans, debating the merits of different plant species, and discussing innovative ways to conserve water and energy. Nights often found us back at the planetarium, recharging our creative batteries under the cosmic canopy. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I first noticed a shift in our dynamic. We were huddled close, sharing a blanket as we gazed up at the stars from our favorite spot on the lawn. Vanessa was pointing out constellations, her arm brushing against mine with each movement. The contact sent little jolts of electricity through my body, and I found myself hyper-aware of her proximity. "And that one there," she was saying, her breath warm against my cheek. "That's Cassiopeia, the queen who boasted of her unrivaled beauty." I turned my head slightly, taking in Vanessa's profile silhouetted against the night sky. "I can think of a view that rivals it," I murmured before I could stop myself. Vanessa's eyes met mine, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she laughed softly, breaking the tension. "Smooth talker," she teased, but I noticed a faint blush coloring her cheeks. As our project progressed, so did our connection. We began to finish each other's sentences, anticipate each other's needs. More than once, I caught myself staring at Vanessa as she worked, admiring the way her brow furrowed in concentration, or how her hands moved with graceful precision as she sketched out designs. One afternoon, as we were planting seedlings in the newly prepared garden beds, Vanessa suddenly straightened up, wiping her brow with the back of her hand and leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. I couldn't help but laugh. "What?" she asked, her eyes dancing with amusement. Without thinking, I reached out and gently wiped the dirt away with my thumb. "You had a little. Just there," I explained, my voice trailing off as I realized how close we were standing. Vanessa's breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might lean in. But then a group of volunteers rounded the corner, shattering the moment. As we said goodbye that evening, there was a new tension between us, electric and undeniable. I watched Vanessa walk away, her figure backlit by the setting sun, and felt an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion. That night, as I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. I was falling for Vanessa. Hard. The realization both thrilled and terrified me. What if she didn't feel the same way? What if pursuing these feelings ruined the beautiful friendship we'd built? As I drifted off to sleep, my dreams were filled with brown eyes, starlit skies, and gardens that stretched to the horizon. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain: my life had irrevocably changed the day I bumped into Vanessa Clark at the Aurora Planetarium. As summer faded into fall, my feelings for Vanessa continued to grow, like ivy creeping up a trellis. Our late-night stargazing sessions became more frequent, each one charged with an unspoken tension that left me both exhilarated and anxious. One crisp evening, we found ourselves at our usual spot outside the planetarium. The air was cool, hinting at the approaching winter, and Vanessa had insisted on bringing an oversized blanket to ward off the chill, as she put it. We sat close, shoulders touching, as we gazed up at the night sky. "Look," Vanessa whispered, pointing upward. Orion's belt is so clear tonight. I followed her gaze, but found my attention drawn more to the curve of her neck than the stars above. Beautiful, I murmured, not entirely sure if I was referring to the constellation or the woman beside me. Vanessa turned to me, a soft smile playing on her lips. You know, Ellie, I've been meaning to ask you something. My heart rate quickened. Oh? What's that? She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took my hand. The contact sent a jolt through my body, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I was wondering if you'd like to help me with another project. It's a bit personal. Of course, I replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. What did you have in mind? Vanessa's eyes sparkled in the starlight. I want to create a miniature version of our community garden on my balcony, something just for us. Would you be interested in helping me design it? The idea of working on something intimate with Vanessa, away from the prying eyes of volunteers and colleagues, made my pulse race. I'd love to, I said, squeezing her hand gently. The next weekend found us on Vanessa's balcony, surrounded by potted plants and gardening tools. The space was small but cozy, with fairy lights strung along the railing and comfortable chairs tucked into one corner. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice how the close quarters amplified every interaction. Our hands brushed as we passed tools back and forth, and more than once, I found myself holding my breath as Vanessa leaned close to examine a plant or adjust a design sketch. You know, Vanessa said as we took a break, sipping cold lemonade and admiring our progress, I've always thought there was something magical about creating life like this, planting a seed, nurturing it, watching it grow. I nodded, watching a bead of condensation roll down her glass. It's like being part of something bigger than yourself, I agreed. A tiny piece of the universe's grand design. Vanessa's eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker in their depths. Exactly, she said softly. It's about connection, finding your place in the world. The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn by an invisible force as potent as gravity. For a moment, I thought Vanessa was doing the same. But then her cat, a fluffy orange tabby named Cosmos, chose that exact moment to jump onto the balcony railing, breaking the spell. We both laughed, the tension dissipating like morning mist. But the memory of that almost moment lingered. As the weeks passed, our balcony garden flourished, mirroring the growing closeness between us. We spent countless evenings there, talking about everything and nothing, our conversations punctuated by comfortable silences and meaningful glances. One night, as we sat admiring the city lights below, Vanessa suddenly turned to me. Ellie, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I need to tell you something. My heart leapt into my throat. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Vanessa took a deep breath, her eyes searching mine. I think I'm developing feelings for you, more than just friendship. For a moment, I was stunned into silence. Here were the words I'd been longing to hear, yet now that the moment had arrived, I found myself paralyzed with fear and hope in equal measure. Vanessa, I began, my voice trembling slightly. But before I could finish, she held up a hand. You don't have to say anything right now, she said quickly. I needed you to know, and if you don't feel the same way, that's okay. I value our friendship too much to let this change things between us. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that I'd been falling for her since that first day at the planetarium. But the words stuck in my throat, held back by a lifetime of caution and self-doubt. Instead, I reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Thank you for telling me, I said softly. I need some time to process this. Is that okay? Vanessa nodded, a mix of hope and apprehension in her eyes. Of course, she replied. Take all the time you need. As I left her apartment that night, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Vanessa's confession had opened a door, but I found myself hesitating on the threshold, unsure whether to step through or retreat to the safety of what we had. Walking home under the starlit sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was at a crossroads. Whatever decision I made next would irrevocably change the course of our relationship. As I looked up at the constellations we'd spent so many nights admiring together, I silently asked the universe for guidance, hoping that somewhere in the vast expanse above, I'd find the courage to follow my heart. The days following Vanessa's confession were a blur of conflicting emotions and sleepless nights. I threw myself into work, analyzing soil samples and writing reports with a fervor that both impressed and concerned my colleagues, but no matter how hard I tried to focus on environmental data, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to Vanessa. It wasn't until I received an invitation to the annual Aurora Environmental Gala that I realized I couldn't avoid my feelings any longer. The event was a black tie affair, bringing together scientists, activists, and policymakers from across the state. As a key speaker, I was expected to attend, and I knew Vanessa would be there, showcasing her innovative urban garden designs. The night of the gala arrived, and I found myself standing before my mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress I'd chosen for the occasion. My blonde hair was swept up in an elegant updo, and I'd applied just a touch more makeup than usual. As I slipped on my heels, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was preparing for more than just a work event. The gala was in full swing when I arrived at the Aurora Grand Hotel. The ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, the air filled with the buzz of conversation and the soft strains of a string quartet. I made my way through the crowd, stopping occasionally to chat with colleagues and accept congratulations on my recent research publication. And then I saw her. Vanessa stood across the room, deep in conversation with the city's parks director. She wore a floor-length gown in a shade of midnight blue that made her look like she'd stepped right out of the night sky. Her brunette hair cascaded over one shoulder in soft waves, and when she laughed at something her companion said, the sound carried across the room, drawing my attention like a beacon. As if sensing my gaze, Vanessa looked up. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the bustling ballroom faded away. She offered a small, almost shy smile, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Before I could second-guess myself, I was moving towards her. Vanessa excused herself from her conversation and met me halfway. Ellie, she breathed, her eyes taking in my appearance. You look stunning. I felt a blush creep up my neck. So do you, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. That color suits you. An awkward silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words and lingering questions. Finally, Vanessa spoke. I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure if I'd avoid you, I finished for her. She nodded, looking slightly abashed. Vanessa, I could never avoid you. I needed time to sort through my feelings. Hope flickered in her eyes. And have you sorted through them, I mean? Before I could respond, the opening chords of a new song filled the air. Without thinking, I held out my hand. Dance with me? Vanessa's eyes widened in surprise, but she took my hand without hesitation. As I led her to the dance floor, I was acutely aware of the eyes following us. In that moment, I realized I didn't care what anyone else thought. All that mattered was the woman in my arms. We swayed to the music, our bodies close, my hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The scent of her perfume, something floral with a hint of citrus, enveloped me, making my head spin. Ellie, Vanessa murmured, her breath warm against my ear. I meant what I said that night on the balcony, but if you don't feel the same way, I pulled back slightly, meeting her gaze. Vanessa, I interrupted, my voice low and intense. I do feel the same way. I have for a while now. I was just scared. Scared of what? She asked, her brown eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath. Of how strongly I feel about you. Of potentially ruining our friendship. Of opening myself up to something I've never experienced before. Vanessa's hand tightened on my shoulder. I'm scared too, she admitted. But being with you, working with you, laughing with you, it feels right. Like the universe conspired to bring us together. I couldn't help but smile at that. Now who's the smooth talker? She laughed softly, and I felt some of the tension dissipate. As we continued to dance, I became increasingly aware of how perfectly we fit together, how natural it felt to hold her close. The song was drawing to a close, and I knew I had a decision to make. As the final notes faded away, I leaned in, my lips barely brushing her ear. "Meet me on the terrace in 5 minutes." Vanessa nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. We separated reluctantly, and I made my way through the crowd, my heart pounding with anticipation. The night air was cool on my skin as I stepped onto the terrace. The city sprawled out below, a tapestry of twinkling lights that rivaled the stars above. I heard the soft click of heels behind me and turned to see Vanessa approaching. She came to stand beside me, our shoulders just touching. For a moment, we simply stood in silence, gazing out at the cityscape. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Vanessa said softly. I turned to look at her, taking in her profile silhouetted against the night sky. "Yes," I replied, not talking about the view. "It is." Vanessa met my gaze, and in that moment, all my doubts and fears melted away. I reached out, cupping her face gently in my hand. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, I leaned in. Our lips met in a soft, tentative kiss that quickly deepened, years of pent-up longing and desire pouring out in a single moment. When we finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vanessa rested her forehead against mine. "Wow," she whispered. I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Yeah," I agreed. "Wow." As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the city lights twinkling below and the stars shining above, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that with Vanessa by my side we could face them together. The universe, it seemed, had indeed conspired to bring us together, and I, for one, was profoundly grateful for its cosmic intervention. The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind of stolen kisses, late-night conversations, and an ever-deepening connection that left me feeling both exhilarated and vulnerable. Vanessa and I fell into a comfortable rhythm, our lives intertwining like the vines in her vertical gardens. On this particular evening, we had plans to attend a lecture at the planetarium on the latest discoveries in exoplanet research. The night was unusually warm for autumn, and we decided to walk, our fingers intertwined as we strolled through the city streets. "You know," Vanessa mused, swinging our joined hands slightly, "I never thought I'd be so excited about planetary formation theories." I laughed, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Welcome to my world. Next thing you know, you'll be subscribing to astrophysics journals." She bumped her shoulder against mine playfully. "As long as you promise to explain the big words." As we approached the planetarium, the streets grew quieter. The familiar dome loomed ahead, a beacon of scientific discovery that had become the cornerstone of our relationship. I felt a rush of affection for this place that had brought us together. We were about a block away when I sensed something was off. The street was deserted, the shadows between buildings seeming deeper and more menacing than usual. I tightened my grip on Vanessa's hand, my scientist's brain cataloging potential threats, even as I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. "Ellie?" Vanessa's voice was low, concerned. "Is everything okay?" Before I could respond, a figure stepped out of the shadows ahead of us. Male, tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. My heart rate spiked as adrenaline flooded my system. Well, the man drawled, his voice rough. "What do we have here?" I instinctively stepped in front of Vanessa, my free hand reaching for my phone. "We don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "That's too bad, 'cause trouble's what you've got." He pulled something from his pocket. The streetlight glinted off metal, and my blood ran cold. A knife. "Your purses, jewelry, phones, now." He gestured with the knife, taking a step closer. I felt Vanessa trembling behind me, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My mind raced, weighing our options. We were outnumbered, outmatched. The logical part of my brain knew that compliance was our safest bet. But as I looked at the man threatening us, something snapped inside me. This was our safe place, our sanctuary. I'd be damned if I let someone taint that. Vanessa, I murmured. When I say run, sprint for the planetarium. Don't look back. Ellie, no, she started to protest, but I cut her off. Trust me. The mugger was getting impatient. I said, hand it over. He lunged forward and I saw my opening. Run, I shouted, simultaneously stepping forward and to the side. I swung my purse with all my might, catching the assailant off guard. The heavy bag, laden with my work laptop, connected with his knife hand. He cursed, the weapon clattering to the ground. I heard Vanessa's footsteps pounding the pavement behind me as she ran. Good. Now I just had to buy her enough time to get help. The mugger recovered quickly, anger replacing surprise. You'll regret that, bitch, he snarled, advancing on me. I backed away, my heart pounding. I'd taken self-defense classes, but facing a real attacker was entirely different from practicing in a well-lit gym. As he swung at me, I ducked, feeling the whoosh of air as his fist passed over my head. Adrenaline surged through me as I realized this was real, this was happening. I lashed out with a kick, aiming for his knee. I connected, but not as solidly as I'd hoped. He stumbled but didn't go down. His next punch caught me in the side, driving the air from my lungs. I gasped, stumbling backward. He pressed his advantage, grabbing my arm and twisting it behind my back. Pain shot through my shoulder as he pushed me against the rough brick wall of a nearby building. Not so tough now, are you? He hissed in my ear. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Not now, not when Vanessa might come back, putting herself in danger. With a surge of desperate strength, I slammed my head back, feeling a satisfying crunch as I connected with his nose. He howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I spun around, my fist connecting with his jaw in a move that would have made my self-defense instructor proud. The mugger staggered back, blood streaming from his nose. For a moment we stood facing each other, both breathing heavily. Then the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air. Relief flooded through me as I realized help was on the way. The mugger's eyes widened in panic. With one last venomous glare in my direction, he turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had emerged. I sagged against the wall, the adrenaline leaving my system as quickly as it had come. My side ached where he'd hit me, and my shoulder throbbed from being twisted. Ellie! Vanessa's voice rang out, filled with worry and relief. She ran towards me, followed closely by 2 police officers. As she reached me, Vanessa threw her arms around me, holding me tight. I winced slightly at the pressure on my bruised ribs, but returned the embrace just as fiercely. Are you okay? I was so scared, Vanessa murmured into my hair. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. As the police approached, asking questions and taking statements, I kept my arm around Vanessa, drawing strength from her presence. Later, after the police had gone and we'd given our statements, Vanessa and I sat on a bench outside the planetarium. The lecture we'd planned to attend was long over, but neither of us was ready to leave. You could have been killed, Vanessa said softly, her fingers gently tracing the bruise forming on my cheekbone. I caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I couldn't let him hurt you, I replied simply. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. My brave, foolish scientist, she murmured, leaning in to kiss me softly. As we sat there, the stars twinkling above us, I realized something profound. The fear I'd felt wasn't just for my own safety, but for Vanessa's. The thought of her being hurt had been more terrifying than anything the mugger could have done to me. In that moment, looking into Vanessa's warm brown eyes, I knew with absolute certainty that what I felt for her was love. Deep, all-encompassing love that made me want to protect her, cherish her, spend every moment making her happy. The night's events had shaken us, but they had also crystallized something beautiful. As we made our way home, hands clasped tightly together, I silently thanked the universe for bringing this incredible woman into my life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we'd face them together, our bond stronger than ever. The aftermath of the mugging left its mark on both Vanessa and me. For days I found myself jumping at shadows, my body tense and ready for a fight that wasn't coming. Vanessa, too, seemed more subdued, her usual vibrant energy dimmed by the lingering fear of what could have happened. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, about a week after the incident, that things finally came to a head. We were at my apartment, ostensibly working on plans for the community garden, but in reality we were both lost in our own thoughts. I watched Vanessa from across the room, noting the furrow between her brows as she stared unseeing at the sketch in front of her. The bruise on my cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but I could still feel the phantom ache of it every time I caught Vanessa looking at me with worry in her eyes. "Vanessa," I said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there. "We need to talk about what happened," she sighed, putting down her pencil. "I know. I don't know how." I moved to sit beside her on the couch, taking her hand in mine. "Let's start with how you're feeling." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on my palm. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Ellie. Not just of what happened, but of how close I came to losing you. When I saw you after, when I saw what he'd done to you." Her voice broke, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her as she buried her face in my neck. "I'm right here," I murmured, stroking her hair. "I'm safe. We're safe. But what if next time we're not?" Vanessa's words were muffled against my skin, but I could hear the fear in them clearly. "What if next time you get hurt worse or—" "Hey," I said firmly, pulling back to look her in the eyes. "We can't live our lives in fear of what might happen. That's no way to exist." Vanessa nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know that logically, but every time I close my eyes, I see you pinned against that wall, and I feel so helpless." I cupped her face in my hands, my thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You weren't helpless, you got help. You saved us both." She leaned into my touch, her eyes closing. "I love you, Ellie," she whispered. "I think I've loved you since that first day at the planetarium. And the thought of losing you." My heart swelled at her words. It was the first time either of us had said it out loud, and despite the gravity of our conversation, I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. "I love you too, Vanessa," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "So much that it scares me sometimes. But that love, it's worth facing any fear." Vanessa's eyes opened, meeting mine with an intensity that took my breath away. And then, before I could fully process what was happening, she was kissing me. It wasn't like our previous kisses, soft and exploratory. This was passionate, almost desperate, as if she was trying to pour all of her fear and love and relief into a single moment. I responded in kind, my hands tangling in her hair as I pulled her closer. The world fell away, narrowing down to the points where our bodies connected. Every brush of her lips, every soft gasp and quiet moan, sent shivers down my spine. We broke apart, both breathing heavily. Vanessa's eyes were dark, her pupils dilated. "Ellie," she breathed, her voice husky. I want." I nodded, understanding without words. "Are you sure?" I asked, needing to hear her say it. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied, and then she was kissing me again. We stumbled to the bedroom, shedding clothes along the way. As we fell onto the bed, I took a moment to drink in the sight of Vanessa, her skin glowing in the soft afternoon light filtering through the curtains. "You're beautiful," I murmured, trailing my fingers along the curve of her hip. Vanessa blushed, a shy smile playing at her lips. "So are you," she replied, her hand coming up to trace the line of my collarbone. What followed was a dance of exploration and discovery. We took our time, mapping each other's bodies with hands and lips, learning what made the other gasp and moan. It was tender and passionate, clumsy at times, but perfect in its imperfection. As we lay tangled together afterward, our bodies cooling in the quiet of the room, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fear and tension of the past week seemed to melt away, replaced by a bone-deep contentment. Vanessa propped herself up on one elbow, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my stomach. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. I smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm thinking that I love you, and that whatever life throws at us, we'll face it together." She leaned down to kiss me softly. "Together," she agreed. As the afternoon faded into evening, we stayed wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and making love again. The world outside my apartment ceased to exist, our universe narrowing down to just the two of us. Later, as we sat on the balcony watching the stars come out, I felt a shift in the air between us. It wasn't just that we had crossed a physical boundary, it was as if our entire relationship had deepened, solidified into something unbreakable. Vanessa leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand finding mine in the darkness. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think the stars were the most beautiful thing in the universe, but now I know better." I turned to look at her, my heart swelling with emotion. "Oh? And what's the most beautiful thing in the universe now?" She met my gaze, her eyes shining with love and a hint of mischief. "You, of course. But don't let it go to your head, Dr. Thompson." I laughed, pulling her in for a kiss. As our lips met, I silently thanked the universe once again for bringing this incredible woman into my life. Whatever the future held, I knew that with Vanessa by my side I could face anything. The months following that pivotal night were a whirlwind of joy and challenges, as Vanessa and I navigated our new relationship. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, our lives intertwining like the roots of the plants in our community garden. Mornings often found us sipping coffee on her balcony, surrounded by the miniature oasis we'd created together. Evenings were spent either at the planetarium, marveling at the cosmos, or curled up on my couch, discussing our latest projects. But as autumn gave way to winter, we faced our first real test as a couple. Vanessa's innovative vertical garden designs had caught the attention of a prestigious landscaping firm in New York City. They offered her a 3-month contract to work on a groundbreaking eco-friendly skyscraper project. "It's an incredible opportunity," Vanessa said, her eyes shining with excitement as she showed me the offer letter. We were in my living room, takeout containers from our favorite Thai place scattered on the coffee table. But I knew what that "but" meant. 3 months on opposite sides of the country. 3 months of video calls instead of good morning kisses. 3 months of missing her smile, her laugh, her touch. "But you're worried about us," I finished for her, setting down my fork. Vanessa nodded, biting her lower lip. "I want to take this job, Ellie. It could open so many doors. But the thought of being away from you for that long." I took a deep breath, pushing down the selfish part of me that wanted to beg her to stay. "Vanessa," I said, taking her hand in mine, "you have to take this opportunity. It's everything you've been working towards." "But what about us?" she asked, her voice small. I squeezed her hand. "We'll make it work. We're scientists, right? We'll approach this like an experiment. Hypothesis: Ellie and Vanessa's relationship can withstand a 3-month separation." That got a small smile out of her. "And how do you propose we test this hypothesis, Dr. Thompson?" "Well," I said, pulling her closer, "we'll need to establish clear communication protocols. Daily video calls, text updates. We'll need to set aside dedicated time for each other, even from a distance. And of course," I added with a grin, "we'll need to conduct extensive reunion experiments when you return." Vanessa laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I love you," she said, leaning in to kiss me softly. "We can do this, right?" I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "We can do this." The day Vanessa left for New York was harder than I'd anticipated. We stood in the airport, arms wrapped tightly around each other, neither wanting to let go. "It's only 3 months," Vanessa murmured into my hair. "We've got this." I nodded, pulling back to look at her. "Go change the world with your gardens in the sky," I said, managing a smile. "I'll be right here when you get back." As I watched her disappear through security, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. But I squared my shoulders and headed back to my car. We had a hypothesis to prove, after all. The first few weeks were the hardest. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in the lab and at the community garden. But every night, no matter how late it was, I made sure to video call Vanessa. Seeing her face on my screen, hearing about her day, and the exciting progress on the skyscraper project became the highlight of my evenings. We'd talk for hours, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence as we worked on our respective projects. "I miss you," Vanessa said one night, about a month into her contract. "The city is amazing and this project is incredible, but it's not the same without you here." I nodded, understanding completely. "I miss you too. The stars aren't as bright without you to share them with." But as the weeks passed, we found our rhythm. We started having virtual date nights, syncing up movies to watch together, or taking virtual tours of museums. I even surprised her one evening by having her favorite meal from our local Italian restaurant delivered to her New York apartment. "You're amazing," she said, her eyes tearing up as she opened the familiar takeout containers. "How did you manage this?" I grinned, holding up my own identical meal. "I have my ways. Now shall we enjoy our long-distance dinner date?" It wasn't always easy. There were nights when the distance felt insurmountable, when all I wanted was to hold her in my arms. But we pushed through, our bond growing stronger with each obstacle we overcame. Before we knew it, it was time for Vanessa to come home. I paced the airport arrivals area, my heart racing with anticipation, and then, suddenly, there she was. Time seemed to slow as Vanessa ran towards me. I opened my arms and she flew into them, her familiar scent enveloping me as I held her tight. "I missed you so much," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I pulled back just enough to look at her, drinking in every detail of her face. "I missed you too," I replied, before capturing her lips in a kiss that made up for every moment we'd been apart. As we drove home, hand in hand, Vanessa couldn't stop talking about her experiences in New York. But more than the exciting project details, what struck me was how her eyes kept finding mine, how her thumb traced patterns on the back of my hand. "You know," she said as we entered my apartment, "I learned something important these past 3 months." "Oh?" I asked, setting down her bags. "What's that?" Vanessa stepped close, wrapping her arms around my neck. "That home isn't a place, it's a person. And you, Ellie Thompson, are my home." I felt tears prick at my eyes as I pulled her close. "Welcome home then," I murmured against her lips. As we fell into bed that night, reacquainting ourselves with each other's bodies, I marveled at how our bond had not only survived the separation, but grown stronger. We'd proven our hypothesis and, in doing so, had laid the foundation for a future together that seemed brighter than all the stars we'd ever studied. Later, as we lay tangled together, Vanessa's head on my chest, I realized something profound. Love, like the universe we so often contemplated, was vast and mysterious. But with Vanessa, I was ready to explore every corner of it. As the seasons changed, so did our lives. Vanessa's success in New York had opened doors we never imagined possible. Her innovative designs were in high demand, and my research on sustainable ecosystems was gaining recognition in the scientific community. We were building our careers, our dreams, and our life together. On a crisp autumn evening, almost 2 years to the day since we first met, Vanessa and I found ourselves back at the Aurora Planetarium. The place that had witnessed the birth of our relationship now stood as a testament to how far we'd come. "Remember our first stargazing session here?" Vanessa asked, her hand warm in mine as we walked through the familiar halls. I chuckled, squeezing her fingers. "How could I forget? I was so nervous I nearly tripped over my own feet trying to impress you with my constellation knowledge." She laughed, the sound echoing off the domed ceiling. "Well, it worked. I found your excitement about Cassiopeia's vanity absolutely charming." As we entered the main exhibition hall, I felt a flutter of nervous excitement in my stomach. I'd been planning this moment for weeks, enlisting the help of my colleagues to make it perfect. "Look," I said, pointing to a new exhibit. "They've added something about exoplanets." Vanessa's eyes lit up with curiosity as we approached the display. It was a beautiful model of a solar system, with planets of various sizes orbiting a central star, but as we got closer, I saw the moment Vanessa realized this wasn't a standard exhibit. The planets weren't labeled with scientific names. Instead, each one bore a significant date or place from our relationship. The day we met, our first kiss, the community garden, New York. Ellie, Vanessa breathed, her eyes wide as she turned to me. What is this? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. This, I said, gesturing to the model, is our universe, the one we've built together. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth as I got down on one knee. Vanessa Clark, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. From the moment I bumped into you in this very room, my life has been on a new trajectory. You've expanded my universe in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me that there's more wonder in a single smile than in all the stars in the sky. I opened the box, revealing a ring with a small twinkling diamond surrounded by smaller emeralds, reminiscent of a constellation. Will you continue exploring this universe with me? Will you marry me? Tears were streaming down Vanessa's face, but her smile was brighter than any star I'd ever seen. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, 1,000 times yes. As I slipped the ring onto her finger, the room erupted in applause. I looked up to see our friends and colleagues emerging from behind various exhibits, all wearing matching grins. Vanessa laughed through her tears, pulling me to my feet and into a deep kiss. When we finally parted, she rested her forehead against mine. You planned all this? I nodded, grinning. I had some help. Turns out scientists are pretty good at keeping secrets when it's for a good cause. Later that night, we found ourselves on the planetarium's rooftop observatory. The city stretched out below us, a tapestry of twinkling lights that mirrored the star-studded sky above. So, Vanessa said, her head resting on my shoulder as we gazed at the constellations, what's next for us, Dr. Thompson-to-be? I chuckled, running my fingers through her hair. Well, future Mrs. Thompson-Clark, I think we have a wedding to plan. And after that, who knows? Vanessa lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine. I was thinking, maybe we could start looking into adoption, or maybe a sperm donor. I know we haven't talked much about kids, but my heart swelled with love and excitement. I think that sounds perfect, I said, pulling her close. A little astronaut or two of our own. She laughed, the sound mixing with the distant hum of the city. Who knows? Maybe they'll be the first humans to set foot on Mars. With us as their moms? I wouldn't be surprised, I replied, only half joking. As we fell into a comfortable silence, I found myself marveling at the journey that had brought us to this moment. From a chance encounter in this very building, to planning a future with children of our own. It was more than I had ever dared to dream. You know, I said softly, I used to think that studying the stars was the closest I'd ever get to understanding the mysteries of the universe. Vanessa looked up at me, curiosity in her eyes. And now? I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Now I know that the greatest mystery, the most beautiful cosmic phenomenon, is love, and I get to explore it every day with you. She leaned in, kissing me softly. When we parted, she whispered, to infinity and beyond. I laughed at the reference, remembering our debate about the scientific accuracy of that phrase during one of our early dates. To infinity and beyond, I agreed. As we turned our gaze back to the stars, Vanessa's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining just as our lives had. The future stretched out before us, as vast and full of possibilities as the universe itself. There would be challenges, of course, moments of doubt, of fear, of frustration. But as I stood there, with the woman I loved by my side, I knew we could face anything together. For in each other we had found our own personal cosmos, a universe of love, of understanding, of shared dreams and endless discovery. And like the ever-expanding universe we studied, our love would continue to grow, to evolve, to reveal new wonders with each passing day. The stars twinkled above us, silent witnesses to our love story. And as I looked at Vanessa, her eyes reflecting the starlight, I knew that our greatest adventures were still to come.